the forgotten town of Coyote Ridge, secrets weren't buried, they were traded like currency. Some secrets were worth a life, others worth taking one. That moonless night, as Sadie Blackwood dragged a bleeding stranger across the threshold of her apothecary, she didn't know she was striking a bargain that would set the entire valley ablaze. Thunder rumbled in the distance, rolling across the desert scrub like a warning. Rain was coming, the first in months, but Sadie knew it wasn't enough to wash away what was about to unfold. She struggled under the weight of the man, his blood seeping through her cotton dress, leaving dark crimson trails on the floorboards. Her small hands, accustomed to grinding herbs and mixing tinctures, now pressed desperately against the bullet wound in his side. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Just a little further, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. His eyes were closed, face ashen. Beneath the grime and stubble, the gunshot had torn through him just below the ribs. Not immediately fatal, her healer's mind assessed, but it would be without proper attention. The stranger had appeared at her back door barely 20 minutes earlier, leaning heavily against the frame, one hand clutching his side, the other held a revolver, hanging limply but present nonetheless. "Please," was all he'd said before collapsing forward. She'd caught him instinctively, her body bracing against his larger frame. Only after dragging him inside did she recognize him from the wanted posters that had appeared in town 2 days prior. Jackson Reed, the Phantom Rider, $7,000 on his head, dead or alive. Sadie had hesitated then, just for a moment. $7,000 would change everything for her. It would mean escape from Coyote Ridge, from the whispers that followed her, from the loneliness that had become her only companion. But the moment passed. She was a healer first, her father's daughter. "We don't choose who deserves mercy," he'd taught her. "That burden isn't ours to carry." Now, as she tore open the man's shirt to better access the wound, she wondered if her father's wisdom would get them both killed before morning light. The bullet had gone clean through. Small mercy. Sadie worked quickly, boiling water, preparing poultices of yarrow and comfrey, grinding willow bark for the pain that would come when consciousness returned. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, mind focused solely on the task. This wasn't her first bullet wound. In a town like Coyote Ridge, situated between nowhere and even less, violence was as common as dust. What made her different, what made them fear her, was her uncanny ability to pull people back from death's door. That, and the unfortunate circumstance of having eyes 2 different colors. Superstition ran deep in these parts. She was halfway through stitching the exit wound when the pounding began at her front door. 3 heavy blows that rattled the glass. Bottles on her shelves. "Miss Blackwood, open up, ranger business." Sadie froze, needle suspended mid-stitch. Her eyes darted to the bloodied floor, to the unconscious outlaw on her table, to the visible trail leading from her back door. "Miss Blackwood, we know you're in there." She quickly tied off the stitch and covered the man with a blanket. Blood still seeped onto her work table, so she grabbed her medical journal and placed it strategically over the stain. "One moment, please," she called, voice steadier than she felt. She wiped her hands on a cloth, tucked it into her pocket, and took a deep breath before opening the front door just wide enough to reveal her face. 5 men stood on her porch. 4 wore the distinct silver star of the Texas Rangers pinned to dusty coats. The 5th was Sheriff Holden, his round face flushed, with what might have been exertion or anger. With Holden, it was often difficult to tell. "Evening, gentlemen," Sadie said, not opening the door any wider. "Someone injured?" The tallest ranger stepped forward. Unlike the others, his coat was clean, his hat unworn by years of sun. His eyes were cold, calculating, taking in every detail of her appearance. "Captain Reyes, Miss Blackwood, we're pursuing a dangerous fugitive shot in an exchange east of here." Left a blood trail heading in this direction. I've been inside all evening, Sadie replied. Haven't heard anything unusual until your knocking. Captain Reyes studied her, gaze lingering on her mismatched eyes. One green, one amber. Most people looked away quickly when they noticed. He did not. Mind if we come in and have a look around? It wasn't really a question. I do mind, actually, Sadie said. I have patient privacy to consider. You have a patient now, Sheriff Holden interjected, peering around her. Mrs. Chen is resting in the back room. Difficult pregnancy. I'd rather not disturb her with a group of armed men stomping through my home. It was a calculated lie. Mrs. Chen was indeed pregnant, but comfortably at home with her husband. Sadie was counting on the Ranger's discomfort with female matters to deter them. Captain Reyes's expression didn't change. The man we're after is Jackson Reed. Killed 3 Rangers in El Paso, robbed the Western Union office in Fort Stockton. He's not someone you want to cross paths with, Miss Blackwood. I appreciate the warning, Sadie said, but as I told you, I've seen no one. A younger ranger shifted impatiently. Captain, we're wasting time. Trail's getting cold. Reyes raised a hand, silencing him without looking away from Sadie. I understand your concern for your patient, but this man is dangerous, wounded and desperate. If you see anything, hear anything, you come directly to us. We're setting up at the sheriff's office. Of course, Sadie nodded. As they turned to leave, Sheriff Holden lingered. Your father was a good man, Sadie. He wouldn't want you mixed up in anything unsavory. The mention of her father sent a sharp pain through her chest. 2 years since the fever had taken him, and still the wound felt fresh. Good night, Sheriff, she said, closing the door before he could say more. Sadie stood motionless, listening to their boots on the wooden porch, the creak of saddles as they mounted, hoofbeats fading into the night. Only when silence returned did she allow herself to exhale. She turned back to her patient, her fugitive, and found his eyes open, watching her. They were the deepest blue she'd ever seen, like the horizon just after sunset. Pain clouded them, but awareness was there. Too, and something else, calculation. They'll be back, he said, voice rough as desert stone. I know, Sadie replied, returning to his side, which is why we need to get that bullet wound closed and you hidden before they do. Why? The question hung between them. Simple, devastating. Why? Indeed. Why risk everything for a stranger, for an outlaw? Sadie resumed her stitching, considering her answer carefully. My father believed everyone deserves healing, she finally said, even those who others think don't deserve it. Your father. Sounds like a foolish man. Sadie's hands stilled. He was many things. Foolish wasn't one of them. Reed studied her face, his gaze catching on her mismatched eyes. Unlike most, he didn't look away. Those Rangers, he said, they'll tear this town apart looking for me. This town has survived worse, Sadie replied, though she wasn't entirely certain that was true. Not what's coming, they haven't. Something in his tone made her pause. What does that mean? But Reed's eyes were closing again, consciousness slipping away as the willow bark tincture took effect. Whatever warning he'd been about to give disappeared with him into the darkness. Sadie finished her work in silence, cleaning the wound, applying healing salves, wrapping his torso in clean bandages. The bullet had missed vital organs, but he'd lost a lot of blood. He needed rest, fluids, time to heal, all things in desperately short supply. Once she was satisfied with his condition, Sadie faced her next challenge, where to hide him. The Rangers would certainly return, and next time they might not be deterred by tales of pregnant women. Her home was small. The front room served as her apothecary shop, with shelves of remedies and herbs lining the walls. Behind that was her living space and kitchen. A narrow staircase led to her bedroom and a small storage room above. None of these would serve as an adequate hiding place. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Unless Sadie moved to the large oak cabinet against the far wall. It had been her father's prized possession, brought all the way from Philadelphia when they'd moved west. She ran her hand along the side until she found the hidden catch. The false back swung open, revealing a narrow space behind, large enough for a man to stand in, or in Reed's case, to lie hidden while he recovered. Her father had built it to hide runaway slaves on their journey further west. After the war, he'd used it to conceal people fleeing other kinds of trouble, battered wives, frightened children, men on the wrong side of powerful enemies. Everyone deserves a second chance, he would say. Sometimes they just need a safe place to catch their breath. Sadie prepared the space quickly, laying down blankets, placing water and medicines within reach. Then came the difficult part, moving Reed. He drifted in and out of consciousness as she struggled to help him to his feet. He was a large man, all muscle and sinew beneath his bloodied clothes. In his weakened state, he could offer little assistance, though he tried. "Almost there," she encouraged, half dragging him across the room. Every step left blood droplets on her floor, evidence she would need to eliminate before the Rangers returned. Finally, she managed to settle him in the hidden compartment. His breathing was labored, skin hot to the touch, fever setting in, not unexpected but concerning nonetheless. "I'll check on you when it's safe," she promised, pressing a small bell into his hand. "Ring if you need anything urgently, otherwise stay silent." Reed nodded, those piercing blue eyes finding hers one last time before she closed the cabinets. False back. Sadie secured the hidden door, then stepped back to examine the cabinet. It looked undisturbed, giving no hint of the wounded outlaw concealed inside. The night stretched long as Sadie scrubbed every trace of blood from her floors and table. She burned the bloody rags in her stove, aired out the metallic scent of blood with burning sage, and prepared her story for the inevitable return of the Rangers. By the time dawn's pale light crept through her windows, she had transformed her home back into the ordinary apothecary of a woman who lived alone. Exhausted, Sadie finally allowed herself to sink into a chair. What had she done? Harboring a wanted man, an outlaw with a price on his head, was madness. If discovered, she would lose everything, possibly even her life. Yet something about Jackson Reed nagged at her. The wanted posters claimed he'd killed 3 Rangers in cold blood, but the man she'd treated didn't strike her as a cold-blooded killer. Dangerous, yes, capable of violence, certainly. But there was something in those blue eyes, something that didn't align with the stories being told about him. Her father had always said there were 3 sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. Sadie wondered what truth lay behind. The legend of the Phantom Rider. The quiet of early morning was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Many horses. Sadie moved to her window and peered out through the curtains. What she saw made her blood run cold. At least 20 riders were entering Coyote Ridge from the east, moving slowly down the main street like a river of shadow and dust. They weren't Rangers. Their clothes were too varied, their manner too undisciplined. But they moved with purpose, with coordination that spoke of shared experience. As they passed under the lone street lamp still burning from the night, Sadie caught a glimpse of their faces. Hard men, weathered, the kind who lived by their own code, outside the boundaries of law and civilization. Outlaws. Jackson Reed's men had come for him. A distant part of Sadie's mind noted how they positioned themselves throughout the small town. 2 took up station outside the general store. 3 surrounded the sheriff's office. 4 more stationed themselves at the saloon. The rest continued toward the west end of town, where the bank and telegraph office stood. It was a takeover, methodical and eerily silent. No shots fired, no commands shouted, just the inexorable presence of men who knew their business, and they were heading straight for her apothecary. Sadie stepped back from the window, heart pounding in her chest. How had they found him? Had Reed somehow signaled them? It seemed impossible given his condition. She had seconds to decide her next move. Reveal Reed's hiding place to his men, remain silent and risk their anger. Neither option appealed to her. Before she could decide, a knock came at her door. Not the heavy pounding of the Rangers, but 3 deliberate taps. Sadie smoothed her skirt, touched a hand to her disheveled hair, and opened the door. The man standing on her porch wasn't what she expected. Where the other riders had been rough-hewn, intimidating in their hardness, this man was different. Lean, almost scholarly in appearance despite his trail-worn clothes. His hair was silver at the temples, though he couldn't have been much past 40. And his eyes, a startling amber that reminded Sadie of autumn leaves, regarded her with curious intensity. "Miss Blackwood," he said, removing his hat, "I believe you have something that belongs to us." His voice was cultured, the accent suggesting education beyond the frontier territories. This was no common outlaw. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sadie replied, instinct keeping her from revealing anything too quickly. The man smiled slightly. "My name is Elias Ward. I ride with Jackson Reed, or rather, he rides with me." He gestured behind him, where the town of Coyote Ridge was systematically being secured by his men. "We tracked him here, followed the Rangers who were following him. Watched them visit you last night." Ward's eyes, so unnervingly similar in color to her own right eye, never left her face. "When they left without him, I knew you must have hidden him. A considerable risk for a woman alone." Sadie said nothing, weighing her options, rapidly diminishing. "We're not here to harm you, Miss Blackwood," Ward continued. "Quite the opposite. We're indebted to you for saving our leader's life. I'm simply here to retrieve him." "He's in no condition to be moved," Sadie found herself saying. "The bullet wound is severe. He's feverish. Moving him could kill him." Ward's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Then it seems we'll be staying in Coyote Ridge until he's well enough to travel." The implications of that statement washed over Sadie like ice water. These men, at least 20 hardened outlaws, planned to occupy her town indefinitely. "The Rangers will return," she warned. "Yes," Ward agreed. "They will, which is why time is of the essence. May I see him?" Sadie hesitated, then stepped aside. To allow Ward entry, something told her this man was more dangerous in his quiet certainty than any gun-toting desperado. She led him to the oak cabinet and revealed the hidden compartment. Jackson Reed was awake, his fevered gaze finding Ward immediately. A look passed between the two men, recognition, relief, and something deeper. A bond Sadie couldn't decipher. "You look terrible," Ward commented dryly. Reed's cracked lips formed a hint of a smile. "Should see the other fellow." "I did. Ranger burial detail was quite efficient." Ward turned to Sadie. "What does he need?" "Rest. Medicine to fight the infection, clean bandages, and absolutely no moving for at least 3 days." Ward nodded. Decision made. "Then we'll ensure he gets precisely that." He moved to the window, surveying the town now controlled by his men. Dawn was breaking fully, painting Coyote Ridge in hues of gold and rose. A deceptively peaceful scene for what was essentially a hostile takeover. "This changes things," Reed rasped from his hiding place. "Wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Plans change," Ward replied simply. "We adapt." Sadie looked between the two men, realization dawning. "You're not just here for him, are you? You have other business in Coyote Ridge." Ward turned those remarkable amber eyes on her again. "Perceptive, Miss Blackwood. Yes, we have unfinished business here, business that's been waiting a very long time." "What kind of business?" "Justice," Reed answered weakly from his sickbed. "The kind the law won't provide." Outside, the town was waking to find itself under new management. Sadie could hear distant voices, confusion giving way to alarm as the citizens of Coyote Ridge discovered their situation. She wondered how long before panic set in, before someone did something foolish and violent. "Your men," she said to Ward. "Will they hurt people?" "Not unless provoked," he answered. "We are not animals, Miss Blackwood, despite what the wanted posters might claim." Reed made a sound from his hiding place, an attempt at laughter that turned into a pained cough. "Speak for yourself, Elias. Some of us enjoy our fearsome reputations." Sadie moved to check on him, concerned by the cough. His fever had risen, skin burning beneath her touch. The wound showed early signs of infection, despite her careful treatment. She would need more herbs, stronger medicine. "He needs willow bark, echinacea, and golden seal," she told Ward. "And rest, real rest, not hidden in a cabinet." Ward nodded. "You'll have whatever you need. My men will ensure no one interferes with his treatment." He gestured to the bed concealed in the cabinet. "And he'll have a proper place to recover." "How do you propose to arrange that, with rangers searching the area?" Sadie asked. Ward's smile held no warmth. "The rangers will find themselves otherwise occupied very soon." He moved toward the door. "I'll send someone to guard you and Jackson. Whoever comes will follow your instructions regarding his care." Before Sadie could protest this arrangement, Ward was gone, striding purposefully toward the center of town where his men had gathered. Left alone with Reed, Sadie turned to assess his worsening condition. The outlaw's blue eyes fixed on her. "And clearer now despite the fever. You should never have helped me," he said softly. "Probably not," she agreed, preparing a fresh poultice for his wound. "But I'm glad you did." His hand caught hers, surprising in its strength despite his weakness. "They won't hurt innocent people. Elias doesn't operate that way." "And what way do you operate, Mr. Reed?" He released her hand, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "That depends on who's asking and what they've done." Something in his tone sent a shiver through Sadie. Not fear exactly, but awareness that the man before her lived by a code she might never fully comprehend. Outside, the sun had fully risen on a day unlike any other in Coyote Ridge's history, a day that had begun with Sadie's fateful decision to help a wounded outlaw and would end where? She couldn't begin to guess. All she knew with certainty was that by sunrise everything had changed. Her town now belonged to strangers with guns and secrets, and she was caught in the center of a storm that had been brewing long before Jackson Reed bled on her doorstep. As if reading her thoughts, Reed spoke again, his voice fading as exhaustion reclaimed him. "There are worse things than outlaws, Miss Blackwood. Sometimes much worse things wear badges and call themselves the law." The words lingered in the air long after he drifted back to unconsciousness, leaving Sadie to wonder what justice these men sought in her forgotten corner of the territory, and what price Coyote Ridge would pay for harboring the notorious Phantom Rider. By midday, Coyote Ridge had transformed from a dusty, forgotten settlement into an armed encampment. The townsfolk moved through their daily routines with wary eyes and hushed voices, uncomfortably aware of the watchful strangers positioned at every critical location. Elias Ward's men operated with quiet efficiency, never drawing weapons unnecessarily, but making their presence inescapable. Sadie stood at her window, observing the strange stillness that had fallen over Main Street. Normally at this hour, children would be playing between errands, ranch hands would be gathering at the saloon for midday meals, and the general store would be bustling with activity. Today, the street remained largely deserted. Those who ventured out moved quickly, heads down, avoiding eye contact with the outsiders who now controlled their town. Behind her, Jackson Reed slept fitfully on her narrow bed, moved there from the hiding cabinet with the help of two of Ward's men. His fever had risen despite Sadie's treatments, his body fighting the infection that threatened to claim him where the ranger's bullet had failed. She had sent one of Ward's men, a surprisingly soft-spoken former cavalry scout named Hawkins, to gather additional herbs from the hills surrounding town. A knock at her door pulled Sadie from her vigil. The man who entered without waiting for her response was neither Ward nor Hawkins, but a shorter, stockier figure with hard eyes and a jagged scar running from temple to jaw. "Emerson," he introduced himself curtly. "Boss wants an update on Reed's condition." Sadie bristled at his tone but maintained her composure. "The infection's spreading. I'm doing what I can, but he needs stronger medicine." Emerson glanced at Reed's unconscious form. "He don't look good." "That's because he isn't," Sadie replied. "The Rangers shot him with a .44. He lost nearly a third of his blood before I could close the wound." "How long before he can ride?" "Ride?" Sadie almost laughed. "He'll be lucky if he can stand in 3 days. Moving him now would kill him." Emerson's expression darkened. "That complicates things." "What things?" But Emerson was already turning to leave. "Boss will want to know. Alters the timeline." "What timeline?" Sadie demanded, following him to the door. "What are you men really doing here?" Emerson paused, studying her with newfound interest. "You really don't know, do you? Even living right in the middle of it all this time." "Know what?" A mirthless smile crossed his scarred face. "Ask your sheriff why half the stagecoaches passing through Coyote Ridge territory never make it to their destinations. Ask who profits when the army payrolls disappear between outposts. Ask whose pockets fill when homesteaders' claims mysteriously burn before they can be registered." Before Sadie could respond, he was gone, leaving her standing in the doorway with more questions than answers. The remainder of the day passed in a haze of anxiety and focused care. Sadie alternated between tending to Reed's worsening fever and watching the town from her windows. Ward's men had established a perimeter around Coyote Ridge, with riders positioned on all approaches. They were clearly expecting the Rangers to return, and soon. Hawkins returned late in the afternoon with the herbs she had requested, along with something unexpected, a sealed letter from Elias Ward. "He said to give this to you directly," Hawkins explained, handing over the folded paper. Sadie opened it with hesitation, unsure what to expect. "Miss Blackwood, I owe you an explanation for our presence in your town, though perhaps you've begun piecing it together already. Coyote Ridge has long served as the center of operations for a criminal enterprise involving your sheriff and several other prominent citizens. For 3 years, they have robbed, murdered, and terrorized travelers and settlers throughout the territory while maintaining a veneer of respectability. My business here is personal. Sheriff Holden and his associates killed my brother 2 years ago when he discovered their operation. They made it look like a Comanche raid, convenient scapegoats for their brutality. Jackson Reed joined my cause after his family's farm was burned for being too close to one of their robbery sites. They couldn't risk witnesses. I tell you this, not to justify our methods, but to explain them. We seek justice the law has failed to provide. Your care for Jackson, at great personal risk, suggests you are not part of their circle. For this reason, I extend my protection to you and ask for your continued discretion. The town will remain under our control only until justice is served. No innocent will be harmed." E.W. Sadie read the letter twice, her mind racing to reconcile this new information with what she knew of Coyote Ridge and its leadership. Sheriff Holden had always seemed more incompetent than malicious, but she had witnessed his preferential treatment of certain citizens, the suspicious wealth of Judge Harmon despite his modest salary, the unexplained absences of Deputy Collins, who often returned with inexplicable injuries. "Is it true?" she asked Hawkins, who had busied himself arranging the gathered herbs on her work table. "Every word," he replied without looking up. "I lost my brother-in-law to their gang, stage driver, shot through the heart for trying to defend his passengers." The sound of hoofbeats from the street drew them both to the window. A group of Coyote Ridge's prominent citizens were gathered outside the sheriff's office. Judge Harmon, banker Thomas Shelby, saloon owner Marcus Pike, and general store proprietor William Fenton. all men of standing, all visibly agitated as they spoke with Elias Ward. Sadie couldn't hear their words, but the tension was palpable, even from a distance. Ward stood relaxed, hands empty at his sides, while the townsmen gesticulated angrily. Finally, Judge Harmon jabbed a finger into Ward's chest, a mistake. Two of Ward's men immediately stepped forward, hands resting on their revolvers. The judge withdrew his hand as if burned. "That's not going to end well," Hawkins murmured. "They're the ones, aren't they?" Sadie asked. "The ones working with Holden," Hawkins nodded, "the respectable face of the operation. They provide the intelligence, planning and protection from prosecution. Holden and his deputies do the dirty work." Behind them, Reed stirred on the bed, a low groan escaping his cracked lips. Sadie returned to his side, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. His eyes opened briefly, unfocused and bright with fever. "Elias," he rasped. "Tell Elias. They're moving it tomorrow night. Army payroll—" "Shh," Sadie soothed. "Save your strength. Hawkins is here. He'll get word to Ward." Reed's hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping her wrist. "Listen to me. The Rangers, not all of them, were shooting at me. Some were shooting at the others." Sadie exchanged a confused glance with Hawkins. "What's he talking about?" she asked. Hawkins's expression grew grave. "He's saying the Rangers are divided. Some might be working with Holden's gang." Reed's grip weakened, his hand falling back to the bed as unconsciousness reclaimed him. Sadie checked his wound. The infection was spreading despite her treatments. His time was running out. "I need willow bark tea and a fresh poultice," she instructed Hawkins. "And someone needs to tell Ward what he said about the Rangers." Hawkins nodded, moving quickly to prepare the tea, while Sadie mixed a stronger poultice. Outside, the confrontation between Ward and the town leaders had dispersed, but the tension lingering in the air felt combustible, ready to ignite at the smallest spark. Night fell over Coyote Ridge like a heavy blanket, bringing neither peace nor respite. Ward's men lit lanterns at strategic positions throughout town, creating pools of light in the otherwise pitch darkness. The message was clear. There would be no sneaking in or out of Coyote Ridge undetected. Sadie worked tirelessly through the evening, trying every remedy she knew to break Reed's fever. Around midnight, the crisis peaked, his temperature soaring, body alternating between violent shivering and profuse sweating. Twice, she thought she'd lost him, only for his labored breathing to resume after terrifying pauses. It was during one of these critical moments that a new commotion erupted outside. Gunshots, 3 in rapid succession, followed by shouting and the sound of running boots. Sadie couldn't leave Reed's side, not now. She pressed another cold compress to his forehead, murmuring encouragement as she checked his pulse, thready but persistent. The gunfire had ceased, but the shouting continued, moving closer to her apothecary. The door burst open, admitting Elias Ward supporting a wounded Hawkins. Between himself and another man, blood soaked Hawkins's left shoulder and side. "Put him on the table," Sadie directed, reluctantly leaving Reed's side. "What happened?" "Ambush," Ward explained tersely as they laid Hawkins down. Holden's deputy and 2 others tried to sneak back into town. Hawkins spotted them first, took a bullet for his trouble. Sadie cut away Hawkins's bloodied shirt, revealing a bullet wound high in his shoulder. Unlike Reed's injury, this one still contained the bullet. "I need to remove it," she told Ward. "Hold him steady." Ward and his man pinned Hawkins to the table, as Sadie worked, extracting the bullet with steady hands despite the circumstances. Hawkins barely made a sound beyond a few stifled groans, a man accustomed to pain. "The deputy?" she asked as she cleaned the wound. "Dead," Ward replied flatly. "Along with one of his companions. The third escaped. Into the night or back to wherever Holden's hiding." Ward's amber eyes studied her with renewed interest. "You've pieced it together." "Your letter helped," Sadie admitted, beginning to stitch Hawkins's wound. though I still don't understand why the law hasn't stopped them if their crimes are so extensive. Ward's laugh held no humor. Who would report them? The local law is part of it. The nearest federal marshal is 3 days' ride, and the territory. Governor is Judge Harmon's cousin. They've constructed their operation perfectly until you arrived. Until Jackson shot 3 corrupt rangers in self-defense and became the territory's most wanted man, Ward corrected. The story spread by the surviving rangers conveniently omitted that they ambushed him after he witnessed them executing a homesteader family. Sadie's hands paused momentarily in their work. The Miller family? 4 months ago? Ward nodded grimly. You knew them? They came to me when their youngest had scarlet fever last winter. Good people. Sadie resumed stitching, her movements more deliberate now. The newspaper said it was an Indian attack. A convenient explanation for brutality, Ward noted bitterly. The same lie they told about my brother. A weak voice interrupted from the bed. Elias. Ward moved quickly to Reed's side. The outlaw's eyes were clearer now, fever broken at last. You look terrible, Reed observed with a shadow of his former. Humor, pot calling the kettle, Ward replied, relief evident in his voice. Welcome back to the land of the living. Not so sure I'm staying, Reed answered, grimacing as he shifted. What's happening? Holden's men tried to sneak back in. We stopped them, but there will be more. Reed's gaze moved to Hawkins on the table, then back to Ward. The payroll. If I heard correctly before I was shot, it moves tomorrow night. Military escort from Fort Davis to Fort Stockton. Ward's expression hardened. Through Miller's Pass. Perfect place for an ambush, Reed confirmed. That's why the Rangers were out there yesterday. Advance preparation. Some genuine, some corrupt. Which is which? Sadie asked, finishing Hawkins's bandaging. Reed's blue eyes found hers across the room. That's the problem. Hard to tell until they're shooting at you. A tense silence filled the apothecary as the implications settled over them. Ward paced the small room, mind clearly racing through options and scenarios. We don't have enough men to take on both Holden's gang and corrupt rangers, he finally said. Not without knowing which rangers are honest. Then we need proof, Sadie suggested. Something that would convince the honest lawmen of what's happening. Reed and Ward exchanged a look that spoke volumes about shared history and understanding. Judge Harmon's records, Reed said. Ward nodded. He keeps ledgers. Jackson saw them when we first started tracking these bastards. Detailed accounts of every robbery, every payoff, every murder. His office is in his home, Sadie offered. West. End of town, big white house with green shutters. Heavily guarded, I'd wager, Reed added. 4 men since this morning, Ward confirmed. His own, not mine. Sadie finished cleaning her instruments, mind working through the problem. I could get in. The judge's wife suffers from nervous complaints. I deliver her tonics weekly. Ward's eyebrows rose. That's too dangerous. More dangerous than harboring wounded outlaws, Sadie countered. Besides, they don't suspect me. I'm just the strange-eyed apothecary who keeps to herself. Reed's soft laugh turned into a cough. She's got you there, Elias. Ward studied Sadie with newfound respect. Even if you got in, finding the ledgers wouldn't be easy. And if you were caught, then give me someone who knows what to look for, Sadie suggested. Someone who can pass as my assistant. Ward considered this, then nodded slowly. Tomorrow morning, I'll have someone ready. Outside, a signal whistle pierced the night, 3 short bursts followed by 1 long. Ward tensed, moving to the window. Riders. Approaching from the south, he explained. Too many for a patrol. The Rangers? Sadie asked, her stomach tightening. Or Holden returning with reinforcements? Ward turned to his man by the door. Tell Matthews to secure the south approach. No shooting unless fired upon. We need to know who we're dealing with. As the man hurried out, Ward looked back at Sadie. It seems our timetable has been accelerated. Can Jackson be moved if necessary? Sadie glanced at Reed, whose fever had broken, but who remained dangerously weak. not without risking his life. Ward's expression grew grim. Then we make our stand here. One way or another, this ends tomorrow. Through the window, Sadie watched as Ward's men moved into defensive positions throughout town. The approaching riders were still invisible in the darkness beyond Coyote Ridge, but their dust cloud reflected the moonlight like a ghostly harbinger. She turned back to her two patients, one beginning to recover, one newly wounded, and to the coming battle that would determine all their fates. For the first time since her father's death, Sadie felt something beyond the familiar emptiness. Purpose, and the unsettling realization that she had, perhaps unwittingly, chosen a side in a war she hadn't known existed until now. "Do you regret helping me?" Reed asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Sadie considered the question, remembering her father's words about mercy and second chances. "Ask me tomorrow," she finally answered, "when this is over." But as the distant sound of hoofbeats grew steadily louder, Sadie wondered if any of them would live to see tomorrow's end. Dawn arrived with an uneasy stillness. The riders they'd heard approaching in the night had stopped short of Coyote Ridge, establishing camp just beyond rifle range south of town. Through her father's old spyglass, Sadie counted 15 men, a mix of rangers and civilians, their campfires still smoldering as morning light spread across the desert plains. "They're waiting for something," Ward observed, standing beside her. On the apothecary's small back porch, he'd spent the night coordinating his men, moving them into defensive positions throughout Coyote Ridge. Despite the sleepless hours, his amber eyes remained alert, calculating. "Or someone," Sadie suggested, collapsing the spyglass. "How many men do you have?" 22 capable of fighting, 3 wounded now, including Jackson and Hawkins. Sadie did the mental arithmetic, nearly even numbers, but the Rangers had the advantage of legal authority. They could wait, send for reinforcements, while Ward's gang was effectively trapped in Coyote Ridge. "We need those ledgers," Ward said, turning back toward the door. "Today." Inside, Reed was awake, propped against the wall. Color had returned to his face, though he remained too weak to stand unassisted. Hawkins rested on a pallet nearby, his shoulder bandaged but his breathing steady. "You have a plan?" Reed asked as Ward entered. "Miss Blackwood is going to pay a house call to Judge Harmon's wife, with Matthews as her assistant." Reed's eyes narrowed. "Matthews is a good shot, but he's no thief. Send Quinn instead." "Quinn's watching the North Road," Ward replied. "Besides, this isn't about theft. It's about finding evidence. It's about getting in and out alive," Reed countered, wincing as he shifted position. "Matthews has the subtlety of a charging buffalo." "I'll go," a female voice interjected from the doorway. All heads turned to the woman who had entered silently. She was slight of build, dressed in men's clothing, with dark hair cropped short beneath a worn hat. A pair of revolvers hung from her hips with an ease that suggested long familiarity. "Ruby," Reed acknowledged with evident surprise, "didn't know you were with the group." "Joined up in Pecos after hearing about your troubles," she replied, her voice carrying a faint accent Sadie couldn't place. "Thought you might need an extra gun, or in this case, a lighter touch." Ward considered the newcomer with measured assessment. "You know what we're looking for?" "Ledgers, judges' records of their operation." Ruby removed her hat, revealing delicate features that belied her armed presence. "I can pass as a lady's assistant better than any of your boys, that's certain." Sadie studied the woman with undisguised curiosity. She hadn't seen Ruby among Ward's men yesterday, but that wasn't surprising. Her attention had been focused on treating Reed and avoiding townspeople's suspicious glances. "Do you have medical knowledge?" Sadie asked. "If you're to be believed." "As my assistant," Ruby smiled slightly. 3 years nursing during the war, Petersburg and Appomattox. I can discuss tinctures and poultices convincingly enough to fool a judge's wife." Ward exchanged a look with Reed, who gave a slight nod, despite his obvious reservations. "It's settled then," Ward decided. "You leave in an hour. The judge's wife typically takes late breakfast on their veranda. Perfect time for a medical consultation." As Ruby and Ward discussed the details of the mission, Sadie tended to her patients, her mind racing with questions about the mysterious woman. There was something in Ruby's manner, a watchfulness, a careful measuring of words, that suggested depths beyond the competent exterior. "She's Pinkerton," Reed murmured, when Sadie checked his bandages, answering her unspoken question. Or was. "Agency disavowed her after a job went wrong in Kansas City." "You trust her?" Sadie asked quietly. Reed's eyes followed Ruby across the room. "With the mission, yes. With my life? That remains to be seen." An hour later, Sadie found herself walking alongside Ruby toward the west end of town, a basket of remedies balanced on her arm. They made an odd pair. Sadie in her simple healer's dress, Ruby transformed into a proper assistant with borrowed clothes and her hair pinned beneath a modest bonnet. "The judge has 4 men guarding the house," Ruby noted casually as they walked, her eyes scanning the street ahead. 2 visible on the porch, likely 2 more inside or around back. "His wife, Constance, suffers from what she calls nervous exhaustion," Sadie explained. "In truth, it's laudanum dependence. The judge keeps her medicated to prevent her nervous episodes from embarrassing him publicly." Ruby's expression hardened momentarily. Convenient. As they approached the large white house with green shutters, Sadie felt the weight of watchful eyes. The 2 guards on the porch straightened, hands resting near their holsters. "Miss Blackwood," one acknowledged gruffly. "Judge didn't mention you were coming." "Mrs. Harmon's weekly treatment," Sadie replied evenly. "Surely he wouldn't want his wife to suffer without her medicine." The guards exchanged uncertain glances before the older one nodded reluctantly. "Wait here." Minutes later, they were ushered through the house's imposing front door and into a sun-drenched veranda where Constance Harmon reclined on a chaise lounge. She was a wisp of a woman, once beautiful but now faded, her movements languid from years of sedative use. "Miss Blackwood," she greeted with a vague smile, "I feared you wouldn't come. With all the unpleasantness in town, your health is in priority, Mrs. Harmon," Sadie assured her, setting down her basket. "I've brought your usual tonic, and my assistant will prepare a fresh cold compress for your headache." Constance's unfocused eyes drifted to Ruby. "A new girl. What happened to your father's old apprentice? What was his name?" "Daniel left for medical school in Philadelphia last fall," Sadie reminded her gently. "Miss Rose is helping me temporarily." While Sadie engaged Mrs. Harmon with questions about her symptoms, Ruby moved efficiently around the veranda, preparing the compress, subtly studying the house's layout. A guard watched from the doorway, but his attention was divided between them and something occurring in the street outside. "The judge has been terribly distressed," Constance confided, voice dropping to a whisper. "These awful men taking over our town. He was up half the night in his study burning papers, said it was for our protection." Sadie's heart sank. "The ledgers, were they already destroyed?" "He's always burning things in that little stove of his," Constance continued, oblivious to Sadie's reaction. "Important documents, he says. Too important for the servants to see." Ruby approached with the compress. "This will ease your headache. Ma'am, if I might suggest, your neck muscles seem quite tense. Perhaps a gentle massage while Miss Blackwood prepares your medicine." Constance agreed readily, turning to allow Ruby access to her shoulders. Over the woman's head, Ruby caught Sadie's eye and mouthed, "Study," with a questioning look. "Mrs. Harmon," Sadie said, selecting bottles from her basket, "I need to prepare a fresh tincture. Might I use your husband's study? The afternoon light. They would be perfect for measuring the proper proportions." "Of course, dear," Constance murmured, already relaxing under Ruby's skilled hands. Through the parlor, first door on the left. "William won't mind. He's at the sheriff's office until noon." The guard straightened. "Ma'am, the judge said no one's to enter his private rooms." Constance waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be absurd. Mr. Collins, Miss Blackwood isn't no one. She's my physician." "Apothecary," Sadie corrected gently. "Even so," the guard insisted, "I should accompany her." "Then who would watch me?" Constance asked with unexpected sharpness. "My husband was quite clear. I'm not to be left alone with strangers. Are you suggesting Miss Rose is a stranger? She's preparing my compress right now. Really, Mr. Collins, you're being most difficult." The guard shifted uncomfortably, caught between conflicting orders. 5 minutes, he finally conceded to Sadie. That's all. Sadie gathered several bottles and moved quickly through the parlor to the judge's study. The room was exactly as she remembered from her few previous visits. Dark wood paneling, heavy curtains, a massive desk dominating the space. A small cast-iron stove stood in the corner, cold now but with ashes indicating recent use. Working swiftly, she searched the most obvious hiding places first. Desk drawers, bookshelves, the cabinet. Behind the desk, nothing, no ledgers, no incriminating documents. The judge had been thorough in his panic, but not thorough enough. As Sadie moved to leave, something caught her eye. A corner of paper protruding from beneath the edge of an ornate carpet. Kneeling quickly, she lifted the carpet's edge to reveal a small trapdoor set into the floorboards. With one ear alert for approaching footsteps, Sadie opened the hidden compartment. Inside lay a single leather-bound book and a stack of letters tied with string. She grabbed both, tucking them into the deep pockets of her apothecary's dress before replacing the carpet. "Time's up," the guard called from the parlor. "Coming," Sadie replied, hastily arranging her bottles on a small tray as if she'd been working with them. When she returned to the veranda, Ruby was still attending to Mrs. Harmon, who had visibly relaxed under her ministrations. Sadie administered the usual laudanum tonic, provided instructions that would never be followed, and made preparations to leave. "Such a lovely girl," Constance murmured, patting Ruby's hand. "You must bring her again, Miss Blackwood." Outside, they maintained their professional demeanor until they were well beyond the Harmon property. Only then did Sadie whisper, "I found something." Ruby nodded almost imperceptibly. "We're being followed. Left side of the street. Man in the brown vest." Sadie resisted the urge to look. "One of the judge's men?" "No, I memorized those faces. This one's new." They continued their deliberate pace through town, the weight of the ledger pressing against Sadie's side, the sensation of being watched prickling along her spine. As they passed the general store, Ruby suddenly stumbled, dropping her portion of the medical supplies. "So clumsy of me," she exclaimed, bending to gather the scattered items. Following her lead, Sadie knelt to help. "He's still there," she whispered. "Closer now," Ruby confirmed under her breath. "When we stand, move toward that alley. Be ready to run." Heart-hammering, Sadie nodded. They stood together and, as planned, angled toward the narrow space between buildings. The moment they were out of the main street's view, Ruby pushed Sadie forward. "Run!" They sprinted through the alley, emerging onto a parallel street lined with smaller homes and workshops. Behind them, boots pounded on packed earth, their pursuer abandoning stealth for speed. "This way!" Sadie gasped, pulling Ruby toward a small shed behind the blacksmith shop. Inside, the air was stifling and thick with the scent of leather and metal. Sadie moved unerringly to a back wall, where she pressed against a seemingly solid wooden panel. It swung inward, revealing a narrow tunnel. "My father's emergency route," she explained, "connects to the root cellar beneath my apothecary." They slipped inside, closing the panel behind them just as their pursuer burst into the shed. In the darkness of the tunnel, they held their breath, listening to the man's frustrated search above. Finally, his footsteps receded. That was too close, Ruby murmured as they navigated the low passage by touch. Who knows you have this escape route? No one living, Sadie replied. My father built several throughout town during the war. Confederate. Patrols were harsh on those with Union sympathies. When they emerged through a trapdoor into Sadie's cellar, Ward and Reed were waiting, the latter propped up in a chair, despite his injuries. You're late, Ward stated, tension evident in his voice. We were about to... Someone followed us from... The judge's house, Ruby interrupted. Not one of his regular men. Ward's expression darkened. Description? Tall, lean, brown vest, cavalry boots, carried himself like military. Ranger, Reed concluded grimly. Did he see where you went? No, Sadie assured him, pulling the ledger and letters from her pocket. But I found these. Ward took the items reverently, as if handling explosive material. He opened the ledger first, scanning its pages with growing intensity. This is it, he confirmed. Names, dates, amounts. Every robbery, every payoff, every murder they've committed for the past 3 years. He looked up, a fierce light in his amber eyes, including evidence of which Rangers are involved. Reed leaned forward despite the pain it clearly caused him. How many? 4 named explicitly. Captain Hayes, Lieutenants Mercer and Phillips, and a Ranger Jenkins. Ward turned another page. And the territorial judge who's been dismissing cases against them, Judge Wilson from El Paso. That explains why they've operated with impunity, Ruby noted. With corrupt Rangers providing protection and a judge ensuring no charges stick. The perfect criminal enterprise, Ward finished. Until now, a commotion from above interrupted their discussion. Footsteps crossed the apothecary floor, followed by Emerson's urgent voice. Boss! Riders coming in from the camp, white flag up. They ascended quickly to find Emerson at the window, spyglass trained on the approaching party. 3 riders, he reported. Captain Reyes in front with the white flag, 2 others flanking. One's a ranger, one looks like a federal marshal. Ward and Reed exchanged significant glances. A parley, Reed suggested. They're looking to negotiate. Or stalling while they position more men, Ward countered. Sadie moved to the window, taking the spyglass from Emerson. Through the lens, she studied the approaching men, focusing on the one Emerson had identified as a federal marshal. He was older than the others, with a silver-streaked beard and the weathered look of a man who'd spent decades in the saddle. I know him, she said with surprise. That's Marshal Taggart. He came through Coyote Ridge about a year ago, tracking a counterfeiter. My father treated his horse when it went lame. Can he be trusted? Ward asked. Sadie considered the question. Seriously, my father thought so. Said he was one of the few lawmen who cared more about justice than jurisdiction. Ward made his decision. I'll meet them, in the street, where our men have clear lines of fire if this is a trap. He held up the ledger, with this as our evidence. I'm coming too, Reed insisted, attempting to stand before pain forced him back down. Not this time, old friend, Ward said with unexpected gentleness. You've already taken 1 bullet for this. A cause. Then I'll go. Sadie surprised herself by volunteering. These are my townspeople affected by Holden's crimes. I should be there to speak for them. Ward studied her for a long moment before nodding. Very well. But stay behind me, and if shooting starts, you find cover immediately. As they prepared to leave, Ruby pulled Sadie aside. Take this, she said quietly, pressing a small derringer into Sadie's hand. Last resort only, but better to have it than not. Sadie hesitated, then slipped the tiny pistol into her pocket alongside the remaining vials of medicine. For healing, or harming, the irony wasn't lost on her. Outside, the morning sun beat down mercilessly as they took positions in the center of Main Street. Ward stood slightly ahead, the ledger visible in his hand, Sadie a few paces behind. Around them, positioned on rooftops and in windows, Ward's men maintained watchful aim on the approaching lawman. Captain Reyes and his companions halted 30 paces away. The white flag fluttered in the hot breeze, an incongruous symbol of peace. Amidst so many weapons poised for violence, "I'm here to negotiate the surrender of your men," Reyes called, voice carrying clearly across the distance, "and the release of any hostages you've taken." "We hold no hostages," Ward replied evenly, "and we'll discuss surrender only after justice has been served." "Justice?" Reyes scoffed. "You're outlaws and killers." Ward held up the ledger. "I have here documented proof that Sheriff Holden, Judge Harmon, and several prominent citizens of Coyote Ridge have been operating a criminal enterprise for years. Robbery, extortion, murder, all detailed in the judge's own hand, including the names of rangers who've assisted them." This caused a visible reaction among the lawmen. The marshal leaned over to whisper something to Reyes, whose expression darkened. "Convenient claims," Reyes called back. "Easy to make, harder to prove." "That's why I'm prepared to turn this evidence over," Ward responded, "but only to Marshal Taggart directly, and only with guarantees of safe passage for my men once the true criminals are in custody." A tense silence followed, as Reyes conferred with his companions. Finally, the marshal himself spoke, his voice carrying the weight of decades of authority. "I'll examine your evidence, Mr. Ward. Alone, halfway between our positions." Ward nodded his agreement. Both men moved forward simultaneously, meeting in the dusty no-man's land between their respective forces. Sadie couldn't hear their conversation, but she watched intently as Ward handed over the ledger and the marshal began to review its contents. Minutes passed, stretching into what felt like hours under the brutal sun. Finally, Marshal Taggart closed the book and said something to Ward that made him nod in apparent satisfaction. As they turned to walk back to their respective sides, a shot cracked through the air. Ward stumbled, clutching his shoulder as blood bloomed across his shirt. From somewhere behind the ranger's position, a wisp of gun smoke rose into the clear blue sky. In an instant, the fragile peace shattered. Guns were drawn on both sides, but before anyone could fire, Marshal Taggart's voice thundered across the street. "Hold your fire! That's an order!" Remarkably, both sides obeyed, weapons ready but not firing as Taggart helped the wounded Ward back towards Sadie. Behind them, Captain Reyes was shouting orders, sending riders to locate the unauthorized shooter. "Get him inside," Taggart instructed Sadie as they reached her. "This negotiation isn't over. It's just changed terms." As they supported Ward between them, Sadie glanced up at the marshal's grim face. "Did you believe him? About the evidence?" Taggart's weathered features hardened. "Judge Harmon's handwriting is well known to me from court documents, and some of these crimes I've suspected for years but couldn't prove." He looked down at her mismatched eyes with unexpected respect. "Your town's about to experience some significant changes, Miss Blackwood. I suggest you prepare for them." Together, they helped Ward toward the apothecary, where Sadie would treat yet another gunshot wound, her third in less than 24 hours. Behind them, the confrontation between lawmen and outlaws remained suspended in uncertain truce, waiting to see which way justice would finally tip in the forgotten town of Coyote Ridge. The bullet passed clean through, Sadie informed her latest patient as she bandaged Ward's shoulder. "You were fortunate. An inch lower would have shattered your collarbone." Ward sat stoically on her examination table, the same one where she had treated Reed and Hawkins before him. The room was beginning to resemble a field hospital more than an apothecary. Marshal Taggart observed from the doorway, his weathered face unreadable as he thumbed through Judge Harmon's ledger. "This changes things," Taggart finally said, closing the book. "Captain Reyes is questioning his men, but it's clear someone doesn't want these negotiations to succeed." "One of the corrupt rangers," Reed suggested from his place by the window. Though still weak, he'd insisted on positioning himself where he could observe the street. Hayes, Mercer, Phillips, or Jenkins. One of them took that shot. Or Sheriff. "Holden," Ruby added. She had been cleaning her revolvers, a task she performed with methodical precision. He has the most to lose if this evidence comes to light. Marshal Taggart studied the assembled group with careful consideration. I've sent riders to Fort Davis requesting backup. Men I personally trust. But they won't arrive until tomorrow, at the earliest, and Holden's reinforcements could arrive sooner, Ward pointed out, wincing as he tested his injured shoulder. Which means we need to move quickly. Taggart agreed. Captain Reyes has agreed to place Judge Harmon and the other town officials named in the ledger under arrest, pending investigation. But Holden and his most loyal deputies are still unaccounted for. Sadie finished bandaging Ward's shoulder and moved to check on Reed's wound. His recovery continued to progress, though he remained too weak for sustained activity. As she changed his dressing, she noticed Ruby watching them with an expression that suggested calculations were being made. The judge's letters, Ruby suddenly said. Have you examined them? Taggart frowned, then produced the bundle of correspondence that had accompanied the ledger. Not thoroughly. Most appear to be between Harmon and various officials in El Paso. And Austin. Ruby extended her hand. May I? Something in her tone caught everyone's attention. Taggart hesitated, then passed her the letters. Ruby untied the string and began sorting through them with practiced efficiency. What are you looking for? Sadie asked. Patterns, Ruby replied absently. Communication codes. The Pinkerton agency taught us to recognize them. She paused at one letter, examining it closely before setting it aside and continuing through the stack. Outside, the standoff continued. Ward's men maintained their positions throughout town, while Reyes and his rangers held their perimeter at the edge of Coyote Ridge. The townspeople remained largely indoors, venturing out only when necessary and hurrying back to the safety of their homes. Here, Ruby finally said, laying out 5 letters in sequence. These aren't what they appear to be. The group gathered around as she pointed to specific sentences in each letter. The first word of each third sentence, when read across these 5 letters, forms a message. Payroll moving through pass tomorrow night. The Army payroll, Reed confirmed, exchanging a look with Ward, just as we suspected. There's more, Ruby continued, indicating another pattern. These random underlined words. They're a separate message about escort numbers and timing. Taggart studied the letters with newfound respect for Ruby's skills. This confirms they're planning to ambush the payroll transport. Tonight. With both corrupt Rangers and Holden's men, Ward added. That's why they're gathering forces. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window they could see a lone rider approaching at a gallop from the east, opposite the direction of the Rangers' position. One of Ward's men intercepted the rider. There was a brief exchange, then both hurried toward the apothecary. Moments later, the door burst open, admitting Matthews, one of Ward's most trusted men, and a dust-covered young man Sadie recognized as Caleb Foster, a ranch hand from the Broken Spoke, spread 15 miles east. Miss Blackwood, Caleb acknowledged breathlessly, removing his hat. Marshal, sir, I came as soon as I could. Sheriff Holden and about a dozen men rode through our ranch 2 hours ago. They've got Mr. Parker. The telegraph operator? Taggart asked sharply. Caleb nodded. Took him at gunpoint, but that ain't all. Before they left, I overheard them talking. They know about the ledger being found. Someone in town sent word. All eyes turned to the window overlooking the street, each person mentally calculating who might have betrayed them. Where were they headed? Ward demanded. Miller's Pass, Caleb replied. Seemed in an almighty hurry, too. The implications settled heavily over the room. Miller's Pass, the perfect location for the planned payroll ambush, with its narrow confines and high rock walls providing natural cover for an attack. They're advancing their timetable, Taggart concluded grimly. With their operation exposed, they'll hit the payroll tonight and disappear with the money before we can organize a proper response. We need to warn the transport, Reed said, attempting to stand before his weakened state forced him back down. "I've already dispatched riders to intercept the payroll escort," Taggart assured him. "But if Holden has the telegraph operator, he may have already sent false orders to divert the transport directly into their trap." Ward rose, adjusting his bandaged shoulder. "Then we ride for Miller's Pass, cut them off before they can set up their ambush." "With what forces?" Taggart challenged. "Your men are keeping Reyes and his rangers contained here. If you withdraw, what's to stop him from arresting you all immediately?" "You could order him to stand down," Ruby suggested. "With the evidence you now hold, Reyes is a by-the-book captain," Taggart interrupted. "Even with the evidence, he'll want proper procedure. That means taking you all into custody first, then sorting out the details later." A tense silence fell as they considered their limited options. It was Sadie who finally broke it. "What if there was a way to convince Captain Reyes to join forces with you, to combine your men with his trustworthy rangers to stop Holden and save the payroll?" All eyes turned to her in surprise. "And how would we accomplish that miracle?" Ward asked. Sadie took a deep breath. "By giving him something he wants more than your arrest, something only we can provide." "Which is?" Taggart prompted. "Incontrovertible proof of which rangers are corrupt, delivered by a witness he can't possibly." "A doubt." Sadie's mismatched eyes found Reed's across the room. "Someone who saw them murder innocent people." Understanding dawned on Reed's face. "You're suggesting I ride out there and confess everything to Reyes, the man who's been hunting me for months?" "Not alone," Sadie clarified, "with Marshal Taggart, and with evidence beyond just your word." She turned to Ruby. "The encrypted letters prove the conspiracy, but they don't identify which specific rangers are involved, do they?" Ruby shook her head. "No names in the coded messages, but there is someone who knows exactly which rangers are working with Holden," Sadie continued. "Someone who's been deeply involved in the operation from the beginning." She paused meaningfully. "Judge Harmon." Ward's amber eyes narrowed as he grasped her strategy. "You think the judge will testify against his own people?" "I think Judge Harmon is a coward who values his own skin above all else," Sadie replied with unexpected steel in her voice. "Especially if he believes the alternative is a public hanging." Taggart stroked his silver-streaked beard thoughtfully. "The judge under guard, with Reed as witness, and these documents as supporting evidence. It might be enough to convince Reyes." "It's a risk," Ward cautioned. "Everything about this situation is a risk," Sadie countered. "But every minute we delay gives Holden more time to prepare his ambush." A plan quickly took shape. Taggart would approach Reyes under flag of truce with Reed, the ledger, and an offer to bring Judge Harmon for questioning. Meanwhile, a smaller force led by Ward would prepare to ride for Miller's Pass the moment Reyes agreed to cooperate. As the men made preparations, Sadie found herself alone with Ruby. "You're not what I expected," Ruby commented, helping Sadie. "Pack medical supplies for the journey ahead." "Neither are you," Sadie replied. "A female Pinkerton operative posing as an outlaw? That can't be common." Ruby's lips curved in a slight smile. "Former operative. And no, not common at all. But neither is a frontier apothecary with mismatched eyes who hides wanted men and outsmarts corrupt officials." "I'm not brave," Sadie admitted quietly, "just stubborn. My father always said it would either save me or get me killed." "It's a fine line between stubbornness and courage," Ruby observed. "I found they often look remarkably similar from the outside." Their conversation was interrupted by Ward's return. "It's time," he announced. "Taggart is ready to approach Reyes." The next hour unfolded with excruciating tension. From the apothecary window, Sadie and Ruby watched as Marshal Taggart and a weakened but determined Reed walked under white flag toward the ranger's position at the edge of town. Judge Harmon, his hands bound before him, was escorted between them by Matthews. What if Reyes simply arrests them all? Sadie worried aloud. Then we implement the contingency plan, Ruby answered calmly, checking her revolvers once more. The contingency plan, as Ward had explained it, involved a desperate dash to Miller's Pass, with whoever remained free, in hopes of warning the payroll transport. It was a last resort that offered little hope of success, but it was better than doing nothing. As they waited, Sadie found herself absently touching the small derringer Ruby had given her earlier. She had never fired a weapon in her life. Her father had been a healer through and through, believing that taking life was never the answer. Yet here she stood, prepared to do whatever became necessary. "They're returning," Ruby announced suddenly, peering through the spyglass. "All of them. And Reyes is with them." Sadie's heart leapt. Did it work? We'll know soon enough. Minutes later, the apothecary door opened to admit Taggart Reed and Captain Reyes, the latter looking grimly determined as his gaze swept the room. "Captain Reyes has agreed to a temporary alliance," Taggart announced. Judge Harmon confirmed the involvement of Lieutenants Mercer and Phillips, as well as Rangers Jenkins and Bauer. Hayes wasn't involved, Ward asked with surprise. "Hayes was investigating them internally," Reyes revealed, speaking for the first time. His voice carried the crisp authority of a man accustomed to command. "He was found dead 3 weeks ago. Supposed hunting accident. Now I understand why." The captain approached Ward, studying him with professional assessment. "I don't condone your methods, Ward. When this is over, there will be a reckoning for past crimes. But right now, stopping Holden and saving that payroll takes priority." Ward nodded once, accepting the terms. "How many men can you contribute to the ride to Miller's Pass?" 8 Rangers. "I personally vouch for," Reyes answered, "plus myself. I'll add 10 of my best," Ward decided. "The rest will remain here to secure the town." "I'm coming too," Reed insisted, though he swayed slightly on his feet. Ward shook his head. "You can barely stand, old friend. You've done your part. If I stay, Reyes's men might be tempted to claim their bounty early," Reed argued. "I'd rather take my chances on the trail." After brief discussion, it was agreed. 20 men would ride for Miller's Pass, a mixed force of Rangers and outlaws united by a temporary common purpose. They would depart within the hour, hoping to reach the pass before Holden could establish his ambush. As preparations accelerated, Sadie found herself packing her medical kit more thoroughly. Something told her there would be wounds to treat before this day ended. "You're not thinking of coming," Ward said from behind her, his tone making it more statement than question. "Someone with medical training should accompany you," she replied without turning around. "Ruby's skills are better utilized with a gun in her hand." "It will be dangerous, Miss Blackwood. Everything has been dangerous since I pulled Jackson. Read through my back door," Sadie countered, finally facing him. "At least this way, I might save lives instead of merely patching up the aftermath." Ward studied her with those intense amber eyes, seeing perhaps more than she intended to reveal. "Your father would be proud," he said finally. The unexpected statement caught her off guard. "You didn't know my father." "I know his daughter," Ward replied simply. "That tells me enough." Outside, horses were being saddled, weapons checked, strategies discussed between men who hours earlier had been enemies. Sadie watched the unusual cooperation with a mixture of hope and trepidation. These temporary alliances, forged in crisis, could shatter at any moment. Just before they were set to depart, Ruby approached Sadie with an unexpected request. "There's something you should know," the former Pinkerton said quietly, drawing her aside from the others. "My presence here isn't coincidental. I've been tracking Holden's operation for months on behalf of private interests." "What interests?" Sadie asked, suddenly wary. "Families of victims," Ruby explained. "They pooled resources to hire me when the law failed them. But there's more to it than that." She hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "The army payroll isn't just money. It's carrying something else, something that certain parties would kill to prevent from reaching Fort Stockton." "What kind of something?" "Evidence implicating the territorial governor in a scheme involving land grants and railroad contracts. Witness statements, documents, enough to bring down more than just a corrupt sheriff and judge." Sadie absorbed this revelation with growing unease. "Does Ward know?" "No, and it needs to stay that way for now," Ruby insisted. "All that matters is stopping Holden's ambush. But afterward—" Her voice trailed off meaningfully, before Sadie could press for more. "Details," Ward called for the riders to mount up. The temporary alliance of lawmen and outlaws formed an unlikely cavalcade at the edge of town, bound for Miller's Pass and whatever awaited them there. As Sadie mounted the horse provided for her, a gentle mare borrowed from the livery, she took one last look at Coyote Ridge, the town that had been her prison and her home, the place where she had lived in her father's shadow for so long. Now it seemed small somehow, just one piece in a much larger game, whose rules she was only beginning to understand. Ruby rode up beside her, those knowing eyes assessing Sadie one final time. "Ready for what comes next?" Sadie touched the derringer, in her pocket, and the medical kit secured to her saddle. Instruments of both healing and harm, the contradiction her father had never been able to reconcile. Perhaps she never would either. "As ready as anyone can be," she answered, urging her horse forward to join the column of riders, now moving toward the rising dust on the eastern. The sun hung low over the jagged hills as the unlikely alliance of rangers and outlaws approached Miller's Pass. Golden light painted the limestone cliffs in shades of fire, casting long shadows across the narrow trail that wound between towering rock walls. It was beautiful in its way, and perfect for an ambush. Captain Reyes raised his hand, signaling the column to halt. "Scout ahead," he ordered one of his rangers, a lean Apache Mexican man named Vega. "No more than a quarter mile, then back." As Vega disappeared silently into the pass, Sadie studied the terrain with growing apprehension. The trail narrowed between steep cliffs, offering countless ledges and outcroppings from which gunmen could rain down fire. In places, the path was barely wide enough for two horses to ride abreast. If Holden and his men were already in position, riding in would be tantamount to suicide. "They're here," Ward murmured beside her, his amber eyes scanning the heights. "I can feel it." "How would you set up the ambush?" Sadie asked, understanding that such knowledge might be their only advantage. Ward pointed to several positions along the route. "High ground there, and there. Cover behind those boulders." They'd split their forces, some above to fire. Down, others at the far end to block escape. His finger traced the narrowest part of the pass. "And they'd spring the trap right about there, where there's nowhere to run, and pour cover for return fire." Ruby rode up on Sadie's other side, her expression thoughtful. "The payroll won't reach this position for at least 2 hours, based on the scheduled route and pace. Which means Holden's men are still setting up," Taggart concluded, joining their assessment. "Our timing might work to our advantage," Vega returned, his approach so silent that several men started when he suddenly appeared beside Reyes's horse. 14 men, he reported in a hushed voice. 8 on the high positions, 6 with Holden near the center of the pass. They've got the telegraph operator tied to a horse, half dead from the looks of him. 2 rangers with them, Jenkins and Phillips. "Any sign they've spotted you?" Reyes asked. Vega shook his head. "They're focused on the western approach, expecting the payroll from that direction. We came in from the east. They're not watching their backs." Taggart, Ward and Reyes huddled together, voices low as they quickly formulated a strategy. The rest of the men dismounted, checking weapons and tightening saddle cinches in preparation for whatever plan emerged. Sadie found herself standing beside Reed, who had dismounted with difficulty but remained stubbornly upright, one hand pressed against his healing wound. "You should have stayed in town," she admonished gently, noting the pallor beneath his tan. Reed's blue eyes met hers with unexpected warmth. "And miss seeing how the story ends? Not a chance. This isn't a story, Mr. Reed. People will die here today." "People have been dying all along, Miss Blackwood. The only question is whether it ends with the right ones facing justice." He studied her face for a moment. "You're afraid, aren't you?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Terrified. But there's something liberating about facing fear alongside good people instead of alone." Before Sadie could respond, Ward approached with their orders. The plan was daring in its simplicity. They would split their forces, with Reyes and Half, the Rangers circling wide to approach the pass from the western side, creating the impression that they were the expected payroll escort. Meanwhile, Ward, Taggart and the rest would use the element of surprise to attack from their current position. "In the east, what about me?" Sadie asked, expecting to be told to remain with the horses at a safe distance. Ward surprised her. "You and Ruby will stay with the main group, but hang back until the shooting stops. We'll need your medical skills after, but I won't risk putting you in the direct line of fire." Ruby nodded her acceptance of this role, though something in her I suggested she had her own plans. As Reyes and his men departed to take their positions, the remaining force prepared for a stealthy approach through the pass. They would advance on foot, leading their horses, using the growing dusk and abundant cover to get as close as possible before launching their attack. "Remember," Taggart instructed as they prepared to move out, "our priority is taking Holden and the corrupt Rangers alive. They need to stand trial for their crimes. The rest of their men, use your judgment." The next 40 minutes passed with excruciating slowness as they picked their way forward. Ward led the way, moving with the silent assurance of a man who had spent his life evading the law. The rest followed in single file, even their horses seeming to understand the need for quiet as they placed each hoof with careful precision. Sadie and Ruby brought up the rear, along with Reed, who had stubbornly insisted on joining despite his condition. As they advanced, Sadie found her senses heightened, every sound magnified, every shadow potentially concealing a threat. This, she realized, was how Ward and his men lived every day. How exhausting it must be to never feel safe. They were perhaps 100 yards from Holden's position when a shout came from the western approach, followed immediately by gunfire. Reyes and his men had been spotted. "Now!" Ward commanded, and their group surged forward, abandoning stealth for speed. Everything happened with disorienting suddenness. Holden's men on the high ground, distracted by Reyes's approach, were slow to recognize the threat from behind. 3 fell before they could bring their weapons to bear. The others scattered, seeking cover as bullets struck stone around them. Sadie pressed herself against a boulder, heart pounding in her ears. Ruby crouched beside her, both revolvers drawn, watching for threats with predatory focus. Reed had somehow acquired a rifle and was providing covering fire despite his weakened state. Through the chaos, Sadie caught glimpses of the main confrontation. Holden and his core group had taken cover behind an overturned wagon, likely positioned to block the payroll transport. Marshal Taggart was calling for their surrender, his powerful voice carrying over the gunfire. "Sheriff Holden, Lieutenant Phillips, throw down your weapons. You're surrounded." The response was a fresh volley of bullets. Somewhere to her left, one of Ward's men cried out and fell. Without thinking, Sadie rushed to his side, keeping low as shots continued to fly overhead. The wounded man was one of Ward's younger followers, barely 20, with a patchy attempt at a beard. A bullet had torn through his upper arm, leaving a messy but non-fatal wound. Sadie worked quickly, applying pressure and a field dressing from her kit. "You'll be fine," she assured him as she secured the bandage. "Stay down and keep pressure on it." A new barrage of gunfire erupted as Reyes and his rangers closed in from the other side. Holden's position was now caught in a devastating crossfire. One by one, his men threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender, but not Holden himself. The corrupt sheriff remained defiant, firing with increasing desperation as his position became untenable. "It's over, Holden," Ward shouted. "You're the last one standing!" "It's never over," Holden screamed back, his voice cracking with frantic rage. "You think this ends with me? There are others. Higher up, more powerful than you can imagine." Ruby tensed beside Sadie, her expression sharpening at Holden's words. Without warning, she slipped away, moving with silent purpose toward a position with a clearer line of fire. Shooting gradually subsided as the last of Holden's men surrendered. Only Holden himself and Ranger Phillips remained active, huddled behind their dwindling cover. "Last chance, Holden," Marshal Taggart called. "Surrender now, or we're coming in." "Shooting!" What happened next unfolded with dreamlike slowness in Sadie's perception. Holden rose from cover, his rifle aimed not at the lawmen surrounding him, but at a slumped figure tied to a nearby horse. Parker, the telegraph operator. At the same moment, Ruby broke from concealment, both revolvers tracking the sheriff with deadly intent. 2 shots cracked almost simultaneously. Holden's bullet struck the dirt as Ruby's found its mark, catching him high in the chest. He staggered backward, surprise etched on his features, then crumpled to the ground. Phillips immediately threw down his weapon. "Don't shoot, I surrender." A strange stillness descended on Miller's Pass. For several heartbeats, no one moved. Then Taggart emerged from cover, approaching the fallen sheriff with his weapon ready. Ward and Reyes converged from different directions, maintaining their uneasy alliance until the situation was secured. Sadie rushed forward to check on Parker, who was conscious but badly beaten. "Water," he gasped as she untied him. "Please." As she helped him drink, Sadie became aware of an intense exchange occurring between Ruby, Ward, and the 2 lawmen. Ruby was speaking rapidly, her usual composure replaced by urgent intensity. "You are. Evidence is in a false panel in the payroll strongbox," she was explaining. "Documents proving Governor Ellis's involvement in land theft, bribery of officials, and ordering the murder of witnesses. Holden and his operation were just one arm of a much larger conspiracy." "And you knew this how?" Reyes demanded suspiciously. "Because I've spent the past year undercover investigating this conspiracy for the Justice Department," Ruby replied, producing a small leather folder that contained official credentials. "My Pinkerton background was real, but I've been a federal agent for the past 3 years." This revelation rippled through the gathered men like a shockwave. Ward looked particularly thunderstruck, as if re-evaluating every interaction he'd had with Ruby since her arrival. "The payroll escort is due in less than an hour," Ruby continued. "The documents must reach Fort Stockton, or powerful people will ensure they disappear permanently." Taggart stroked his beard thoughtfully. "That explains why you were so interested in the letters, and why you shot Holden before he could kill Parker," Reyes added, his tone suggesting newfound respect. "He's a witness to the governor's direct orders." Parker nodded weakly from where Sadie was tending him. "Governor visited the telegraph office himself last month, gave specific instructions about which messages to divert, which to lose, threatened my family if I didn't comply." Ruby holstered her revolvers. "Holden was right about one thing. This goes much higher than a corrupt sheriff and judge. The question now is whether you men will help finish what we've started, or let the true architects of this conspiracy escape justice." An uneasy silence fell as the implications of her words settled over the group. For men like Ward and Reed, who had operated outside the law for years, the idea that corruption extended to the highest levels of territorial government wasn't surprising. For Reyes and his rangers, it represented a devastating challenge to their faith in the system they served. "What exactly are you proposing?" Reyes finally asked. We secure the payroll and the evidence, Ruby answered. Then escort it to Fort Stockton as planned, where Judge Lancaster, who I know personally to be incorruptible, will ensure the documents reach the proper federal authorities. And what about us? Ward gestured to include Reed and his remaining men. We're still wanted men. It was Marshal Taggart who answered. I believe extraordinary service to justice deserves consideration. I can't promise pardons, but I'll testify to your actions here today. That has to count for something. As the details of this new plan were negotiated, Sadie found herself suddenly exhausted. The events of the past 2 days, from the moment Reed collapsed on her doorstep to this bloody confrontation in Miller's Pass, seemed impossibly distant, as if they had happened to someone else. She made her way to a large boulder and sat down, watching as former enemies continued their tense but remarkable cooperation. Bodies were being collected, wounded treated, prisoners secured. The mechanics of aftermath, familiar to these men but entirely new to her. Reed approached slowly, his movement still hampered by his healing wound, and eased himself down beside her. You did well today, he said quietly. Your father would be proud. Sadie looked at him in surprise. You didn't know my father. I know you, Reed replied simply, and that tells me enough. She recognized Ward's words from earlier, now repeated back with gentle humor. Despite everything, she found herself smiling. What happens now? She asked, watching as Ruby continued her intense discussion with the lawman. When this is all over? Reed considered the question carefully. Ward will likely head south. He has family in New Mexico territory. Some of the men will go with him, others will drift back to their own lives, if they can find them again. And you? He met her gaze, those remarkable blue eyes carrying an unspoken question. That depends. On what? On whether there's a reason to stay. The implication hung between them, neither acknowledged nor dismissed. Sadie found herself unable to formulate a response. 2 days ago, Jackson Reed had been a bleeding stranger, a dangerous fugitive she'd hidden on principle. Now he was... What exactly? Before she could untangle her thoughts, Ward approached, his expression unreadable. Payroll escort's been spotted coming up the Western Trail. We're moving into position to meet them. You should both stay here until we've sorted things out. Reed nodded his agreement, but Sadie rose to her feet. I'm coming too. There may be wounded men who need attention. Ward didn't argue, perhaps understanding that Sadie Blackwood had irrevocably changed from the solitary apothecary he'd first encountered. As dusk deepened into true night, lanterns were lit around the pass. The approaching payroll escort, 6 Army soldiers and 2 civilian guards, were understandably suspicious when met by the mixed group of rangers, marshals, and known outlaws. It took Taggart's badge, Reyes's authority, and Ruby's credentials to convince them to halt rather than open fire, while Ruby and the lawmen explained the situation to the bewildered escort leader. Sadie found herself standing at the edge of the activity, gazing back toward Coyote Ridge. From this distance, the lights of the town were barely visible, tiny pinpricks of brightness in the vast darkness of the frontier. She had lived there all her life, yet now it seemed like a place she barely knew. The quiet town had harbored terrible secrets, and her simple existence as a healer had been built on a foundation of others' crimes and cover-ups. What would Coyote Ridge become now, with its corrupt leadership exposed and removed? Penny 4. Your thoughts? Ruby appeared beside her, her mission with the payroll escort apparently complete. I'm wondering what happens to the town now, Sadie admitted, to all the people who never knew what was happening around them. Ruby considered this thoughtfully. Communities are resilient, especially out here where people have already survived. So much. Coyote Ridge will find its way forward, maybe even become something better. And what about you? Once the evidence reaches Fort Stockton, I'll be reassigned, Ruby said with a small shrug. Another town, another conspiracy. It's what I do. Sadie studied the remarkable woman beside her, so different from herself, yet connected now by the extraordinary events they'd shared. Does it ever get easier, living between worlds, never fully belonging anywhere? Ruby's smile held a hint of sadness. You get used to it, but no, it doesn't get easier. That's why moments like this matter, when people from different worlds come together and actually accomplish something worthwhile. She nodded toward Reed, who was deep in conversation with Ward. You should talk to him, you know, before decisions get made that can't be unmade. With that cryptic advice, Ruby walked back to join the main group, leaving Sadie with her swirling thoughts. Dawn was breaking by the time all arrangements were finalized. The payroll would continue to Fort Stockton under heavy guard, including Reyes, Taggart, and Ruby. The prisoners, including the surviving corrupt rangers, would be transported separately, with Ward and several of his men accompanying as additional security until the territory border. As for Sadie, she found herself facing a choice she'd never anticipated. Return to Coyote Ridge and her quiet life as the town's apothecary, or accept Reed's tentative invitation to consider something entirely different. You don't have to decide now, he told her as they stood apart from the others, the morning light painting the cliffs in shades of rose and gold. I have matters to resolve with the law first anyway, but when that's done, I'd like to come back if you'd welcome me. Sadie thought of her father's words about second chances and safe harbors in a storm. She thought of the risks she'd taken and the person she'd discovered herself to be in the crucible of the past 2 days. Coyote Ridge is my home, she finally said. It's where I belong, but perhaps it could be something more than just my haven. Perhaps it could be yours too, when you've finished what you need to do. The smile that transformed Reed's face was answer enough. Not a promise, not yet, but a possibility neither had imagined when fate first brought a bleeding outlaw to a healer's door. As the various parties prepared to depart, Sadie found herself the recipient of unexpected farewells. Ward clasped her hand firmly, those amber eyes conveying respect that needed no words. Taggart offered a formal thanks for her assistance to justice. Ruby embraced her briefly, whispering, "Trust your instincts. They've served you well so far." The unlikely alliance that had formed in crisis now dispersed in different directions, carrying with them the shared experience of these extraordinary days. Sadie mounted her borrowed mare for the journey back to Coyote Ridge, aware that while the town might look the same upon her return, nothing would ever truly be as it was before. Reed rode alongside her for the first mile, their silence comfortable rather than strained. At the fork, where their paths would diverge, hers to Coyote Ridge, his with Ward's group toward the territorial border, he reined his horse to a stop. "I meant what I said," he told her, his blue eyes earnest in the morning light. "When this is finished, I'll return, if that's still what you want." Sadie reached across the space between them, her hand briefly touching his. "I'll leave a lantern burning in the window," she said simply, "for a traveler finding his way home." As she rode alone toward Coyote Ridge, Sadie reflected on how a single decision to help a wounded man in the darkness had set in motion events that transformed not just her life but an entire community. Her father had always taught that healing was about more than mending bodies. It was about mending what was broken in the world around you, whatever the cost or risk. For the first time since his death, Sadie felt she truly understood what he had meant. The town appeared on the horizon, bathed in morning light, waiting to begin its own journey of healing. And Sadie Blackwood, the apothecary with mismatched eyes who had once hidden a wounded outlaw when rangers searched for him, rode. toward it with a heart more open to possibility than it had ever been before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.